John McMullen, of course, football at 4, covers the NFL, covers the Eagles, but also covered the NBA for a while. And he has a great piece up right now at 97.3 ESPN.com that really talks about how surreal this stuff could be. And, John, I guess in your time, when did you cover the NBA?
Right in Kobe's wheelhouse when the Lakers were winning titles. The last NBA Finals I did was the Miami Heat, LeBron's first when they lost to Dirk Nowitzki and the Mavericks, but that Lakers-Celtics series. So many all-star games with Kobe, who was there basically every year, obviously. And it's just, it's when you see someone like that who's famous enough to, you don't even have to say the last name, and sort of transcended basketball, sort of transcended sports, and became more of an entertainment figure than anything else, and even won an Oscar. This guy was a true superstar. So many people, and you could see the outpouring of love and how much he affected people's lives. And, you're going about your day, and he's a little bit different, as I kind of explained in the piece, and obviously had the means to do things. And he had been traveling in his helicopter for years, because anyone who's been in Southern California knows how bad the traffic can be. And it was just a lot of rich people, to be honest, in Southern California do that, because if you think about time and how valuable it is, and the fact that you can get somewhere in 15 minutes, and he could spend more time with his kids, and that's what he always preached about. And it was just part of his daily routine. And that's how he went about life every single day. And that routine just went horribly wrong. It's just devastating so many ways.
Yeah, and you wrote in the piece that, hours later, you're still not quite sure why this particular celebrity death hit you like a ton of bricks. 24 hours later, have you been able to kind of clear your mind a little bit as to why this one is hitting you so much?
Well, I think it's that for that reason. It's just, we all go out and we trust things. And I kind of explained it as, in a different way, the average person doesn't have Kobe's means, but whether it's trusting a veteran helicopter pilot or your mechanic, who fixes your car and rotates your tires, you don't even think about it. You just trust other people you don't know, the car next to you. You just trust that they're not going to lose focus at the wrong time and affect your life. And everybody does this thousands of times every day if you leave your house. And so when it's uprooted like that with somebody so famous, and I got to know him, as I said, in a very limited fashion, but someone you dealt with over the years, it just really hits home. It can happen to anybody at any time, and it shakes you a little bit.
What are some of the, you said you covered the All-Star games and some finals. Anything that stands out about any instances that, we all kind of have been in a locker room and there's been something that kind of stands out about a star player who did this or said that, or you recall, is there something like that with Kobe? Because as Ryan had kind of talked about earlier, in the city of Los Angeles, he was the star that shined brighter than every other star.
Yeah, for me, it's a little bit different. He and LeBron James always struck me in similar ways because they're so famous. And it's not only, it's to an almost unbelievable level. You can't conceptually figure the fact that it goes beyond this country, goes beyond these borders. Basketball's become a worldwide sport. And guys like that have such fame, and you deal with them on an individual level, and it doesn't seem to affect them, at least how they treat people, how they treated me in interactions. And so to be down to earth with that kind of fame always impressed me, because let's be honest, I've met a lot of people who aren't that way, with far less fame than those particular two players. And that's what always struck out. And I think the other dichotomy with superstar players, and I think everyone's different, but there's always one thing in common, and that's work ethic. And anybody who ever talked about Kobe players, just talked about his work ethic. And I always say, I've probably said it on this show, I hate the term generational talent. I hate it because it's so overused. And you hear about drafts in the NFL and the NBA, you hear about generational talents every year. Well, think about that term, generational talent. It means once in a generation. It doesn't come around every year. So there's a lot of guys, that have the talent to be superstars, but it's gotta mesh with work ethic and competitiveness, or you don't reach that level. And that's where guys like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, that's where they lap the competition. And you can go to the NFL, same thing, whether it's Tom Brady or any other superstar. Just the work ethic is, we always talk about superstars. In a lot of ways, they have so much physical gifts, it comes easier for them. And then you talk about the gritty guy who works so hard. Well, the true transcendent, the true generational players, they have that work ethic of the gritty player, even though they don't need it. And that's where Kobe was.
John, this area, Philadelphia, Jersey, the people are not, say, unaccustomed to seeing this. I mean, there's been Pele Lindbergh, who died a tragic death, Jerome Brown, obviously Roy Halladay, even more recently. But we were all trying to figure about a comp of how, a really famous, almost superstar athlete to have a tragic death like this. And, I brought up Roberto Clemente, who, and I wasn't old enough, but this is the 70s, and there's not Twitter, and there's not this round-the-clock news coverage. But as far as shaking up the sports world and being a total icon in both the sport and the town in which he played, I think that's probably the most comparable.
Yeah, and I don't even think that's comparable, only because it wasn't as big, and you didn't have social media, and it wasn't worldwide.
Right.
In that case, it was obviously Puerto Rico and the U.S., and it was huge, and I'm not trying to downplay it. But this is a guy, this is where you have to go to this is where you go with Prince and Michael Jackson, and that's the kind of fame that Kobe Bryant had. It far transcended sports. So I think that way it's so much larger because there's so many more people. As sports guys, we're all sports guys. So anytime you talk about Pele Lindbergh, my house is less than a mile away from where Pele crashed his car. That's huge, as you mentioned, in this area. You mentioned Jerome Brown. It's all huge to us as sports guys, but a lot of people don't like sports, and they're into other things. They're into entertainment. They're into politics, what have you. So you have to go to like major entertainment celebrities or major political figures. That's how big this is, and that's how big he was. And that's why I say it's so impressive to me. And I've always defended both Kobe and LeBron James because they had in Kobe's case, unfortunately, which talking in past tense, and LeBron, he has a lot of haters. And I always say these guys are incredibly grounded, incredibly down to earth. And I don't say that about every sports star. Trust me. And the fact that these guys were able to encompass and live their lives in that level of fame, that's the most impressive part to me. And they lived their lives, and generally, and I know people can bring up, not saying he was a perfect person. There's a high-profile legal case that already people are trying to dredge up, but no one's perfect. But in my dealings with him, he was incredibly grounded for just how big a star he was.
John, you obviously covered Kobe Bryant. So this isn't really probably the fairest question in the world, but what's a comparable football player that maybe mimicked his mental IQ and his mental toughness? Because, I mean, Gil brought it up earlier. Like, what Kobe was able to do in between his ears was arguably just as, if not more impressive than his physical ability. And when you match those two, that's when you really have something special before your eyes. So who's someone comparable in football locker rooms?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think basketball IQ was off the charts with Kobe Bryant. So the first, when you talk about cerebral football players, the first one that comes to mind is Peyton Manning, and similar to Kobe is the fact that the term gym rat isn't used as much in football as it is in basketball, but it's still used. And Peyton was that kind of guy who always wanted to be on the field, always wanted to be practicing, always wanted to be in the film room, always wanted to learn more, and always knew more than basically the opposing coach. And that's why he had such a difficulty. And I always talk about those Indianapolis Colts teams. They started every year. And this, to me, defined Peyton Manning's greatness as a player. You could start at 10 wins. That was a bad season. Double digits was a bad season. If you had 10, that's the worst you were going to do, and then you went up. 11 would be a mediocre season. 12, 13 would be an expected season. If you got up to 14, it would be a great season. It had, I think, 8 consecutive years of more than 12 wins at one point. That's the one guy I look at from a competitiveness and an IQ standpoint that would be sort of a comp.
All right, we're talking with John McMullen, Football at 4, obviously, but getting some perspective from John and read his article at 973ESPN.com on the passing of Kobe and the senselessness of it and the mindset of how we live our everyday lives. It is kind of an eye-opening thought when you really think about simply driving down the street and the trust that you have of the person next to you and how quickly, even for a guy as larger than life as Kobe was. You ever covered anybody on that level? I mean, is he the biggest guy? I mean, we talk about football, basketball. I mean, basketball players seem to trump football players for the most part. I contend earlier that if Kobe came before Jordan, we would say Kobe first. He would be the guy. He was that close to Jordan. It's just that he came second, and unfortunately, because he was second, Jordan is thought of as the first.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest star I ever covered is LeBron James, and no disrespect to Kobe. And I think you're right with the NBA because of how, and I've talked about this a lot, the NFL markets teams. So it's about the Eagles, it's about the Cowboys, it's about the Giants. In the NBA, David Stern really started that, marketed players and personalities. And it really just started to take off massively with Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. And then, as you mentioned, Michael Jordan and Kobe would be in that category. And then LeBron maybe trumps them all. Maybe even, it's hard to say if he trumps MJ, but he's the only one in that category because the sport itself has gotten so much more popular. You could say on a grand scale that he's even trumped them all. But Kobe's top 10 of all time in that league as a player, as a star, and as a closer. And he's the best closer other than Michael Jordan. I think that's fair to say.
All right, let's get a couple quick football hits in here with John over the weekend. Marquand Manuel is the new defensive backs coach. He was a Falcons coordinator. We hinted at it Friday. That looks like a done deal. Well, it is a done deal now. So he will be a part of the Eagles coaching staff. And as we were trying to fill in some, holes on this coaching staff on Friday, it seems that the defensive side has a lot more experience today.
Yeah, a lot bigger names at least. And you mentioned Manuel as a former defensive coordinator. Matt Burke is a former defensive coordinator taking over the defensive line. So, Philip Daniels was a first-year defensive line coach last year. And now you have a former DC there. Now, he was the assistant to Chris Wilson for a number of years, but still it was a jump up. Corey Unlin, as I mentioned, was a veteran coach, but for whatever reason, I mean, the people certainly thought he was kind of a problem. I think, as I've said pretty consistently with most of this coaching staff, the good and the bad, I think the issues last year, if there were issues, I think the team, to be honest, overachieved when you look at and encompass the personnel deficiencies and all the injuries. I think the bigger problem were personnel. I continue to think that way, but we've mentioned that happens all over the league, and you're seeing these press releases come out pretty much daily because everyone locked up various assistants at the Senior Bowl, as expected. People shuffling their staff. That's what happens in this league. When you're labeled as underachieving, you have to make some changes, and that's where the Eagles were and are, fair or not. And now Minnesota just made it official with Gary Kubiak about 20 minutes before we came on the air. So Eagles are one of the last teams to get their coaching staff situated. And we'll see how it works out. I mean, but they're getting veteran guys, so that part probably is a positive.
All right, John, I'm going to give you 3 scenarios, and you tell me which one you think right now you're sensing is most likely for the Eagles on their offensive coordinator. A, they're taking somebody who's just coaching in the Super Bowl. B, they're going to wind up with what you would call a retread, fair or not, like maybe a Jim Caldwell or a Marty Morningweg. Or C, they're going to promote Press Taylor to the job.
Well, I hope it's A. I don't see any reason to wait as long as they're waiting if they're not waiting for a reason. And the only reason at this point would be till after the Super Bowl. And there's a couple names. Mike Kafka is not in the equation, as we know, but Mike LaFleur, Mike McDaniel could be in the equation. Who knows what San Francisco would do. But that, to me, if they're going to promote Press Taylor, you should have done it already. And even if you're going to take someone that's on the street, Freddie Kitchens just got hired today as a tight ends coach. That's how far he's fallen with the New York Giants. So, that kind of stuff should have already been done if that's the way you're thinking. And so in a lot of ways, if it's past the Super Bowl and they're either elevating Press Taylor or they are getting somebody who's maybe been out of the league for a year, like Marquand Manuel, to be offensive coordinator, I think that would be a little bit disappointing to me at this point, only because what's taken so long, if that's the goal.
Well, let's talk about the 2 guys you mentioned, Mike LaFleur, who's the passing game coordinator for the 49ers, and Mike McDaniel, who's the running game coordinator for the 49ers. What impetus would each one have, kind of like the same way we talked about Mike Kafka, to come be the offensive coordinator for the Eagles, where they wouldn't be calling plays when essentially that's what they're doing, just splitting up running and passing with the 49ers. So maybe you're adding a little bit more, but again, you're not calling the plays, so you're probably, knowing Doug, trying to be implemented for passing ideas. So I feel like that's lateral.
Yeah, well, in the case of LaFleur, you could make the same argument as you just did with Mike Kafka. It could be lateral, certainly, except from a title standpoint, would probably be lateral. So, maybe that I always talk about sometimes this is a personal decision. Sometimes you want that title, and sometimes it's important to you. It could be as simple as that. In the case of Mike McDaniel, it's probably a little bit of a step up to go from run game coordinator to essentially what he would be here would be passing game coordinator. So from his standpoint, somebody like that, it might be a slight step up. But you're right. I mean, if they're comfortable in San Francisco, there's no reason. On the other hand, if they're uncomfortable for whatever reason, it could be personality driven. Could be wanting to be on the East Coast, could be location, could be a whole host of things. They could look to go in another direction. I just think from the Eagles, the way they've handled this search, there's no question. Let's put it this way, Jeff. If you elevate Press Taylor at this point, there's no question that you can't even argue that was your plan A.
No, it'll feel like the Juan Castillo move many years ago when they just were turned down by so many people and didn't have anybody that they finally gave Juan the carrot that he had been dangling in front of them for years. They didn't want to do it, but they had no other options.
Yeah, and that would be obvious. Now, you could probably sell it a little bit more if you're getting somebody who's been out of the league and off the street, but those in the industry would kind of know, well, if you really wanted to do that, you would have gotten it done. You would have had it buttoned up long before this. So from that standpoint, I think they know it's going to be a tougher sell if they have to settle. So the hope is, and I think people are speculating, that they must have a name in mind. Otherwise, they would have gotten things done. And if you're looking at those two particular names, it would certainly be McDaniel more than LaFleur.
Last one, real quick. Browns have hired Andrew Berry as their GM. Done deal. He was with the Eagles and not sure of what his role with the Eagles was.
Yeah, he'll be 11 months. Didn't even make it a year. But he did have a significant role. People in the organization have told me he was second, truly second to Howie Roseman on the football side of the organization. The difference is he was involved in everything. So more than Joe Douglas, people are painting this as he lost his second in command. Well, this is a much bigger second command. In other words, Howie deals with everything. He deals with personnel. He deals with analytics. He deals with college scouting as well, in that personnel aspect of it. He deals with contracts, and he deals with strategy. And Andrew was involved with all of that. So he was sort of his second in command as a true general manager, whereas Joe Douglas was just head of personnel, and that's where Andy Waddle is. Ultimately, I don't even think the Eagles are going to replace the position. It didn't exist before Andrew Berry. It's probably not going to exist after Andrew Berry unless they find somebody who they think has a future in the ability to do all those different things, and that's easier to find. That's easier said than done.
All right, John McMullen, Football at 4. Check out his piece on Kobe Bryant at 973ESPN.com. And he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Thanks, John.
All right, thank you, guys.